Hi, my name is Molina Santana. I'm a commercial lawyer by profession. I have a passion for giving back to community. I was really amazed by the sporting culture in the country. You can get into sport in all kinds of ways.
Molina's passion for community service is evident in her extensive involvement on various boards, including those for gymnastics, handball, and table tennis.
I think being a South Asian woman who's been successful in the legal profession, which is predominantly white Anglo-Saxon, it has been a struggle. I call it the double-glazed glass ceiling. You have to keep going and make sure that you look after yourself. Sport really helps you in finding those social circles, finding those skills, finding the peer support.
Molina also touched on her initiatives to make sports more accessible and inclusive, particularly for women and multicultural communities.
Unless and until you force that change upon organizations, it's not going to happen. There's a direct link between safety and high performance. You need to lean on other people, be collaborative in your approach.
Where big dreams meet bold action. Where we share real stories, actionable insights, and the inspiration needed to transform your ideas into businesses. Are you ready to turn your ideas into success and be an inspiration to others? Join Inspirepreneur.
Hi, my name is Molina Santana. I'm a commercial lawyer by profession, but I serve on a number of boards as well, including sports boards. I've been the chair of gymnastics previously. I currently chair handball in Victoria and also deputy chair of table tennis. I serve on the Vic Sport board. I'm also on the board of a public health service, government, Moen Health, and I'm on the board of the Graduate House of the University of Melbourne. And I used to be on the board of the Law Institute of Victoria. So I have a passion for giving back to community. So I serve on a number of community organization advisories as well. Yeah, so I grew up in India, predominantly Delhi. I come from a family of lawyers and judges, influenced of course by what I saw growing up, what the family does and the ethics of the family. I was eventually drawn into the legal profession, not really sort of initially deciding that I wouldn't do it, but then ended up there. Practiced for a few years in India, then got married to someone in Australia and moved here about 21 years ago. I did my Masters of Law at Melbourne University, and it is very iconic that we're sitting here today at University of Melbourne recording this at Graduate Union, where I used to come here as a student because the law school is just across the road. So I did my Masters of Law, then I started practicing here. I worked for the top tier firms, and I worked also for the Victorian government as a principal solicitor. But on, I had done a lot of public interest litigations and community work in India as well, and I wanted to give back to community once I had settled into work here. So a lot of my work has been giving back to communities, serving on boards, on community organizations, and now a lot to do with sport as well. Giving back to community through sport and inclusion in sport and good governance in sport, and then also trying to now see what we can do between Australia and India in the bilateral space in both law and sport. So when I moved to Australia, I was really amazed by the sporting culture in the country. Everyone's sort of running, cycling, walking to work, and you see organized sport all around you. I obviously got drawn to sports, so I started running. I've done a number of half marathons now. I didn't know sport when I was growing up in India because there just isn't and wasn't the culture of sport. It's getting better now, but when I was growing up, there wasn't. So I really enjoyed it, and but when I looked around, I didn't see many women like myself or even people of multicultural backgrounds participating in sport. So I started my not-for-profit Multicultural Women in Sport, and through that I worked with a lot of sporting organizations. Then eventually because I was also doing community work, some of them asked me to become the ambassador. For example, AFL, Cricket Australia, Commonwealth Games, T20 World Cup, Jean Haley's Women's Health, Change Our Game ambassador for the state of Victoria and others. And then also being a lawyer, I think my skills were useful for sporting boards, so I got onto some sports boards as well, and tribunals. So now I'm very much embedded in the sporting industry. It's a very organic journey. I didn't start out to do that, but I think I'm really enjoying that. It's sort of, I'm still practicing. I still have my own legal practice, but this sort of gives me that other, law is a very serious profession, whereas sport is kind of fun and an interesting way of also bringing about social change. So for me, both of them, I guess, two different kind of aspects of my life. One is a profession, one is a passion, but I love both of them. So you can get into sport in all kinds of ways. You don't necessarily even have to play. If you of course want to play, there's lots of clubs around you. You'll find every sport possible: football, basketball, there's Australian rules football, there is table tennis, there's badminton. Anything you want to do, there'll be clubs around you, there'll be local facilities around you that you can join and participate. Of course, if you want to do it competitively, you can go up through the ranks as well, because Australia's got a really good system of competition as well, where you can represent the country if you're of course a citizen of Australia. So that's one pathway, but there's also various ways in which you can get involved. For example, volunteering at a sporting club. So you may find a local club around you and go there and volunteer, on the committee, or even in the canteen, or being an umpire or a coach or something like that. Some of them are paid positions, but a lot of the community sport is volunteer based. So that's a really good way of being part of Australian way of life, giving back to community, being part of a community, and sort of socializing as well. So I encourage everyone to volunteer in sport. You can also be a broadcaster in sport if you like. You can, as I said, officiating is a big thing, umpiring, coaching, and things like that. So there's numerous ways in which you can get involved, and I encourage actually everyone to get involved. Even if your kids are playing, you can go and play as well. It's not, the age, there's no limit, age limit in terms of participation. Find something that you find interesting. Even if it's a walking group, running group, bushwalking, so many different, options available. For me, in India, I think I sort of started exploring my leadership capabilities, or rather my desire to give back to community early on. I did a number of public interest litigations in India, which were reported in the newspaper. So I was sort of always involved in that. And when I moved to Australia, obviously I gave a few years of my life just sort of settling in, finding my feet, getting established in the profession. But I think my leadership role sort of started with me taking on a role at the Law Institute of Victoria. I got on the board there, it's predominantly still a very male Anglo legal community. Now there's a lot more females, but it's still very Anglo. So getting on to that, being elected to that position was a big thing, because I wasn't expecting it, but I was the first person, I believe, maybe not the first person of multicultural background, one of the very few people of multicultural background on that board, and someone who was a migrant and who was not born in this country. So to be able to take on a leadership position in my profession, where I had to start from scratch here in Australia, was a big thing. And then some other leadership roles followed. And when I talk about sport as well, again, same thing, being appointed an ambassador for some, prestigious organization like Cricket Australia, or even the Commonwealth Games, that was defining. And then a really fun moment, I'm not sure if you can call it a leadership moment, but it came through the leadership positions, was being able to carry the T20 World Cup trophy onto the field at MCG, amongst 87,000 people during the India-Zimbabwe game, with all the cricketers around me. So that was like a dream come true. It was absolutely the most, interesting moment of my sporting kind of work that I've done. So all those are defining moments, I think. So favorite cricketer, I would say, I think everyone's favorite cricketer seems to be Virat Kohli. I think he is a really good player, but there's so many others. Rohit Sharma is good. There's a lot of new ones that have come up who are doing very well, like even Abhishek Sharma. He's really doing well. I think everyone's favorite is obviously Virat Kohli, but I see the newcomers come really well, are doing amazingly well. Abhishek Sharma, Shubman Gill, Yashvi, so many younger ones coming through the ranks. That wasn't before. If you look at history of cricket, there were established people from very well-to-do families who used to dominate cricket. People like Sunny Gavaskar. Kapil Dev, of course, came from a different background, but I know Sunil Gavaskar pretty well, and he's told me stories of how different cricket is now to what it is. There's a lot of structure to it, and you could probably create 3 India teams that would be fantastic, you know, doing amazingly well. That wasn't the case before. It was very hierarchical. There was, you know, people who already established with families would get into sports. So it's changed over time. Of course, there's all-time favorites. As I said, Sunil Gavaskar and Kapil Dev and all are everyone's favorite as well. But I love some of the Australian cricketers, you know, Steve Waugh, Matthew Hayden. Matthew, who I know pretty well as well. He's a good friend now. His daughter is now, Grace Hayden, is actually going in comment, you know, being she's a host for the T20 World Cup. She's been a host for IPL. So she's also gone. So the next generation of Australian cricketers are doing well in India. So they're very popular there as well. So yes, I have done some work with Tennis Australia, particularly with the Australian Open, in how we can make the Australian Open more inclusive for people of diverse backgrounds. So, you know, there was a informal committee that I've been part of. So through that, they have created prayer rooms there, accessible spaces, you know, sensory rooms, signage in different language, wheelchair access everywhere, Pride Cup, Women and Girls Day, so many interesting initiatives, even food of different cultures. Before that, it wasn't that diverse. Now, through consultations with the community, Tennis Australia has done really well in making the Tennis Australian Open such an inclusive tournament. It's one of the best, I think, in the world, the most inclusive and fun as well. So AFL is an interesting one. It's the biggest sport for Victoria, and if you live in Victoria, you just cannot avoid being part of it some way, shape or form. So I think it came about through my community work. I was serving on a few boards and working on issues, you know, of family violence and migrant issues and general, you know, community leadership for people of diverse background. So AFL was at some point, this is going back maybe 12, 15 years ago, was appointing ambassadors from the community of people who can reach out to the community and talk about the value of sport, talk about the you know, how great the game is, the AFL, and how they can get more people involved in AFL. So they appointed me as an ambassador for AFL in that process. You know, they appointed a number of ambassadors, but I think there was quite a few of us, but I went over and above and got really involved with the sport. I was running workshops myself. I was setting up stalls at, you know, Indian festivals. I had kids coming through, you know, demonstrating what AFL means. I used to even get my daughter, who's been playing since since she was 4. Now she's 17. She still plays. So she used to come and help. My husband, who was born in Australia, he used to come and help as well. So, you know, it became something that I really loved, you know, being part of, and because it's a sport that's so popular, I thought it's really important for people, migrants who come to the country, to get involved in that sport. So that's how I got more and more involved. And then one of the board positions came up, and AFL thought I would be really good at it because I'm also a lawyer and have governance experience. I still serve on a number of other boards. So that's how sort of I got more and more involved with AFL as well. Richmond has won 3 premierships in my time, so go Tigers. Yeah, so there is, you know, there's touch footy that is played sometimes after work, so slightly older people play that sport as well. So that's a sort of a modified version where there's not that much contact and people find it easier to play. So you can go and join a club that has touch footy. There is, if it's young kids, if you have friends who have young kids, they can go join, you know, one of the programs that they run, or SKIC that they run in various suburbs, so you can join that. But there's also clubs in most of the suburbs, so if people want to go join a club, they can. The only thing is that people who play for clubs have a little bit more experience. Some of them will have kind of rookie players as well, but a little bit more experience. So, but maybe you can go start a club somewhere. Maybe find a local community and start. If there's, you know, a few people you know, interested, go and start a new club to play footy as well. So I think being a South Asian woman who's been successful in the legal profession, which is predominantly white Anglo-Saxon, it has been a struggle. I wouldn't say it has come easy. There are a lot of barriers that are not necessarily visible to everyone. Unconscious bias is one of those. So people will generally associate Indians with IT, or now it's like they say you're cab drivers, or working in 7-Elevens and things like that. So they always have a perception that we will not be successful or in leadership positions. Whereas if you go to law school, you will see that so many of the students are from Asian backgrounds and South Asian backgrounds. So clearly they obviously are doing well, but that perception still remains that, okay, this is not a profession for them. There's all that bias that they will never do the work properly. They tend to find more mistakes in the work of South Asian people or Indian people than they would of other, if it was a white person doing the same job. So there's, and usually you would find that you're not included in the system. So I worked at top tier firms in Australia. There was Friday evening drinks. If someone doesn't drink, they won't be part of that circle anyways, and I'm sure not everyone does. I mean, I'm okay to have a glass of wine, I don't mind it, but there's a lot of people who don't. So, and particularly if you look at the Muslim culture, people from Muslim culture, they don't drink. So how do they become part of that culture? And the conversations were always around football. Of course, as I said, now football is part of my life, but it wasn't. AFL wasn't part of my life then. So, talks about footy, about the schools they went to, the shows they grew up watching, the private schools that they're part of, they went to, the steak clubs they're part of. A lot of Indians won't eat steak. So those are the things that unconsciously exclude you from being part of the circle. Nobody makes an effort to get to know you. So if you feel ostracized, you're also not going to get the work because you're not part of those circles where the work is being shared. It goes to the people who are from the same, who grew up in the same kind of, demographic as the other people in the firm. So your progression also slows down. So those are some of the things that are not visible to people. What is happening more recently, I'm seeing a lot of Indian lawyers come into the legal profession, which is great. But what is happening is that a lot of them are starting their own practice without having worked for anyone else because they still don't get jobs. The jobs are still going to the white Anglo people. So that is a failing of our own system. Eventually people say the quality of the work is not good of migrants. That's because our system has failed them. The system doesn't give them a job. So how do you expect them to be better when they don't have the right training? So that's something I've been advocating for, that I did through the Law Institute of Victoria. I've always said that we need to give a chance to these people. Otherwise, you cannot complain yourself because you are the ones that are failing these people. So I think when I came in, it may have changed a little bit now, is that even recruiters would slot you into certain kind of jobs, or they would not put forward your CV if they didn't think you were the right candidate. And that they make that decision based on your heritage, on your background, on your educational qualifications possibly overseas, and your lack of experience in Australia. So that is a big problem because a lot of migrants come qualified, well qualified, have good working experience somewhere else, and may have worked at that high level, at the highest level, but all of those experiences are discounted here. So that used to be how the recruiters used to screen your CV. So you would never get a chance. You wouldn't even be put forward as a candidate for a good position because nobody was actually passing on your CV. I faced the same thing when I came to Australia in the profession. I literally had to go around the system. I went and met partners of law firms directly and approached them and said, this is the skill set I have, this is the experience I have, I think your firm would benefit from it. So my first job obviously was at a top tier firm. Second one was as well, and then with the government. But that was because I still knew the recruiters are not going to put my CV forward, so I had to find some indirect route to get through. In fact, there's a very funny story that I was working for a top tier law firm. I was moving to another one. I wanted to move to another one because I wanted to work in another area of law. My CV was with a recruiter. They kept saying, no, you won't find a job in your area. You have to either, go to a boutique firm, which meant like a, small firm in the suburb, or change, think about some other options. I said, no, I'm going to pursue that. So anyways, I got a job at another law firm as well, which was, as I said, one of the top tier firms. This recruiter calls me up and says, oh, I've got a job opening for you in a small firm. I said, would you like to consider that? I said, no, I'm working at this firm. And he's like, how? So he got a shock. He nearly died. And he's like, how did you get this job? Instead of congratulating me or anything, he said, oh, how did you get that job? Because to him, that was the biggest shock of his life. Like, how can someone like me get a job here at a top tier firm? So that used to be what I faced, and maybe people still face the same. I have my own practice now, so I can't say anymore. But I do feel that there's a lot of recruiters who come to me now and say they want to push forward diverse candidates. I guess the hiring, position descriptions now mentioned that they are looking for people of culturally diverse backgrounds as well. So at least on paper, they are making an effort. Whether or not it really happens, I think is still to be seen. Yeah, so I call it the double-glazed glass ceiling. So glass ceiling is what women face, double-glazed glass ceiling is what women of color face. And I face that constantly. I'm sure a lot of women like me face it constantly as well. When you're overlooked for leadership positions, when you put your hand up, you are told that you are spreading yourself too thin. Whereas if a white woman would say that, everyone would say, oh wow, she's so ambitious, she's fantastic, she's a go-getter. But to me, they will just say, no, you've got too much on, don't try to take too much on, you won't be able to manage that. People talk all over you all the time. So if you're in a boardroom, you're kind of invisible sometimes. I wonder how, being brown, I shouldn't be the one invisible, but constantly people talking over me. If I suggest something, they'll overlook that. If someone else does that, who's of Anglo background, suddenly that becomes the best idea in the room. And I have to say, well, I just said that a few minutes ago. So those kind of things happen, those whether it's direct or indirect or subconscious, unconscious bias, it happens all the time. These are the extra barriers that we as women face, and they're constantly trying to find fault with whatever you're doing. And then you have to work doubly hard to even reach half a level as compared to everyone else. So I constantly face that. I still face that, even being on leadership positions. I think when you reach a certain leadership positions, there's only one or two at the top. It becomes even harder, because at that point, there's everyone trying to oust you because they need to get to that position. And sometimes I find that women also don't support other women, because, and I have a theory for it, because I feel that a lot of women have fought very hard to get to a position, so they don't want to get anyone else. And because there's such few positions, if they let someone in, they might be ousted. So unless and until you create more seats on a table, we will constantly start facing that. We need to have at least 50% women for women to not feel threatened by other women coming up. Men don't feel threatened by other men coming up. They always have these boys clubs. But we women always are protective of our spaces, because we know if we let someone in, we might lose our own space, because some other man would probably oust one of us. So those kind of biases do exist, and the glass ceilings, the double glazed glass ceilings. Yeah. So as women, and also women of color, we face the imposter syndrome. So we constantly start, when you face barriers all the time, you start questioning yourself. You start thinking, am I doing the right thing? Am I actually a leader? Can I achieve what I've set out to achieve? And that can pull you down. But I've always sort of usually tried to stay self-motivated, but I do have to say that I myself almost faced I had started getting anxiety, panic attacks because of the discrimination that I was facing. And I literally had to take time off work for more than a month or 2 months, 1.5 months, to just recover from that. And I started seeing, a psychologist. I was also given some medications, which luckily I got off pretty quickly. But that's a warning sign that you need to get out of toxic places and situations. That's when I realized, okay, this is not working for me. Obviously, something's really wrong. I shouldn't start doubting myself, and to an extent where my mental health is being impacted. So I obviously moved out of the spaces I wasn't comfortable with, moved into more sort of, environments that were more suitable, or that I felt were more suitable for me, where I was more valued. So I was working for the government for 11 years as a principal solicitor. Great, it was much better than working for private sector. There was less competition. At least you were not pitted against each other constantly. There was better working hours, there was a bit more diversity, so you felt more comfortable in those spaces. So it's just that you have to keep going and make sure that you look after yourself, get out of these sort of toxic kind of situations. And also, I believe physical exercise is also important. Of course, I talk a lot about sport and why it's important, but that physical activity of any kind really helps you get out of that mindset as well. So take time off and do things that you enjoy, outdoors, that helps. So you have to be mindful of those situations. Otherwise, you will be bogged down and you won't be able to get up. And the thing you have to do as someone of a diverse background, constantly you will be pushed back. You have to get up and keep fighting, keep doing the stuff that you want to do. So you need to retain that energy to do that, whether it's mental or physical. I think it takes a lot of courage to admit that you have mental health issues, and also to know that mental health issues are not a stigma like it's made out to be in the South Asian culture. You're not mad. Everyone in life, there's statistics to prove that every person in life will go through mental health issues at some stage in life. So you've got to be conscious of that, be mindful of that, and take help where required, whether it's from your community, your family, or a psychologist or therapist, whoever you feel comfortable with, where you can speak about the issues that you're facing, get some help, find solutions to what you're facing, because you can't face it alone. Especially as migrants, issue of isolation is massive, and mental health issues are, I know that most people go through that at some point. So I also think initially, obviously I didn't tell work at that point that I was going through that. I myself didn't believe it. I actually thought I had physical symptoms like palpitations and chest pain, and I ended up in hospital a few times thinking I was having a heart attack, but I wasn't. It was all psychosomatic because I was feeling what I was feeling. And those were panic attacks, which I later realized. And as soon as I figured out that I was having that, I said, I need to do something about it, whether to see a therapist, whether to, take medication, do whatever I need to do. But most of all was to find the resilience, to stand up and say, okay, I know this is my mind, this is happening to me because of the mental, whatever I'm feeling, I need to, find a solution to that. So everyone needs to do that. Otherwise you will get stuck in that and you will not be able to get out. A lot of people, and some people I know on medication forever. Like I got off it in a couple of months because I knew that was firstly it's not good for me. I need to manage it myself. I have to make myself mentally strong. So I did that, but not everyone can. So you need to constantly find that help and support to be able to do that. And I encourage everyone to reach out when you are facing any such issues. Yeah, I think high achievers tend to push themselves a lot. And other thing is that they take on a lot of load on behalf of other people as well. I do believe that leaders have a role in challenging systems. So, but when they do, they take a lot of burden on themselves for the betterment of others, but it does take its toll eventually, because you can't keep doing it without sustaining yourself with something else. So it is something that I found with a lot of leaders. Yes, they do have burnout at certain times. They have friction at certain times. The other reason why leaders have these issues is because as leaders, you're called a troublemaker sometimes. I am constantly called a troublemaker because I'm challenging institutions and views. So that also has an impact. So I think it is the nature of leadership, unfortunately, that you do take on these issues that are going to be contentious. And otherwise, you will not be a leader. If you're doing the same thing as everyone else, you will not be a leader. So it is part and parcel of being a leader. But as I said before as well, you've got to keep looking after yourself. If you do that and manage your expectations and not take on too much, also find ways of spreading that work, delegating that work to someone else, creating more leaders, so that the next generation or whoever else is able to take on that load along with you. Push back when you need to push back. Learn to say no. That is also important, because I've been like that. I always say yes to everything. Whoever comes to me, yes, I will do this, I'll be part of this, because I always feel I should help. But then eventually you reach a point when you just can't do it. So you have to realize when you've reached that point and what you can and can't do. But yeah, unfortunately, it is sort of a little bit part of the leadership journey. I think in sport, obviously sport inherently is a competitive field. So anyone who's going to be in sport is going to be a bit competitive. They are mainly athletes, but even when I run, I'm usually, so when I do half marathons, I'm not competing with the fastest runner. Obviously they run like in 1 hour, 15, 20 minutes. I would run in 2 hours a half marathon. But I'm still competing with myself at that point, because I want to have the best PB, as we call it, personal best. So in the next marathon, if I've done it in 2 hours, I would want to do it in 1 hour, 55 minutes or 57 minutes even. But even if it's a minute, I want to do better than that. So I think inherently as leaders in sport, you are sort of a little bit competitive. You see that all the time. But I think sport brings a lot of really good leadership capabilities in you also, which is teamwork. a lot of leaders are silo leaders, right? You tend to work in silo. You're a leader, you don't know how to manage with a team. But someone who plays a team sport, someone who's part of sport, usually has different kind of leadership abilities, because they're able to manage, you learn to work as a team towards common goals and learn to work with each other. Gain this, you lean on the strengths of certain people in certain things. So everyone has a strength in certain areas. When you play as a team, you know who's going to play where, what their positions are going to be, who's a better, kick, who can kick better, who can defend better, who can do whatever better. So you find that balance in terms, and that's a good leadership quality, to be able to do that and not always sort of think that I'm the best leader and I can't rely on others. You need to lean on other people, be collaborative in your approach. So I think that kind of thing comes through sport as well. Yeah, so I think that I'm very conscious and proud of my heritage, being an Indian person. So I've always kind of tried to retain the good Indian the values that I've learned growing up in India, and trying to combine them with the good values that Australians bring as well. For example, being non-judgmental, having less hierarchy, more egalitarian. So, giving everyone a fair go, at least in principle. So those kind of things, if you combine, that always shapes your leadership journey. So I feel like my leadership journey has been shaped both by Australia and India. But now that it's been shaped, whatever I've done here, I want to take back to India as well, because I feel like I don't want to lose the roots that I have. I still want to give back to India, a place where I grew up. So I'm doing more and more with India now. Whether it's in the legal field, I've done a lot in the past as well, trying to contribute towards lawmaking in India as an expert. Also speaking at conferences, talking about opening up of the Indian legal system, pushing that agenda there. But more so in sport recently. India's now, they're going to host the 2030 Commonwealth Games. They've also put in a bid for the 2036 Olympics. Australia is going to host 2032 Olympics. We are already gearing up for that. I'm part of an Australian Sports Commission play-by leadership group, which is working towards the participation strategy for Australia going into the Olympics. So I've done so much work in sports. So I feel I have that expertise and cultural background, and now a bit of knowledge about Indian sports ecosystem as well, to be able to see what collaborations are possible that make India also a superpower in sport. Because I do feel India has a lot of potential if the systems could be we start thinking about good governance in sport, start thinking about more opportunities, more pathways in sport, then India would also become be very competitive and do very well in a lot of the sports, in the sporting arena. So that's what I'm doing more recently, and I think it's more I do, more I kind of learn, more it helps in my own leadership journey. So it's kind of an evolving kind of landscape. So so sports governance is challenging because there's less resources there. So there is a perception that sports makes a lot of money. It's not true. Only a few sports make money, even in Australia. Maybe 4 or 5 top sport. The other sports really run at the smell of an oily rag. So we have to make do with the very little resources. So some of our organization will have only 4 staff. But there's a lot of people that you service. Because, for example, table tennis, we've got only 3-4 staff. But the base is thousands of people. So many people play the sport. So we've still got to service our club base, our players, and our high performance. There's a number of different aspects to it as well. So resourcing, I think, is one of the biggest challenges. Also, sport, even in Australia, has been run by people who have been either playing the sport or part of sport for a very long time. So you will see people on sporting boards who've been there for, let's say, 30 years. And they're not necessarily skilled in governance, but they love the sport, they're passionate about it, and they have good intentions. That doesn't help, because you need the skill set. So that has been an issue for sports governance, that people with the right skill set are not comprising the board. So that is something that has been, a lot of reform is being done in that space by Australian Sports Commission, by Australian, even in Victorian government, by having say women on half now. There's a reservation for women, quota for women on boards, 40% at the state level, 50% at the federal level. and there is a requirement to have a skills-based board. For example, having a lawyer, someone who's good at finances, someone who's good at commercials. So having that kind of a skill set as well. So and having less representation of states on the federal board, because the peak board, because that always creates friction between the state and the peak body. So a lot of reform has been done in the past number of 10 or so years in Australia as well to make the governance much better in sport. But those are the issues that I mentioned have been, there's still challenges, but I think we're slowly trying to overcome those challenges now. So the top sports that are making money are AFL, Australian Rules Football, tennis, rugby, and cricket. They're probably the 4 top sports, I would say. One thing that is glaringly obvious is that if you look at the judiciary, it's still Anglo. It's male Anglo. So it can't be representative of our population, nor can it understand all the, the nuances of the changing demographic. For example, dowry is an issue with the South Asian communities. It's also an issue with the African communities. It used to be an issue with Chinese, Greek communities as well. That's not something that was understood by the judges here, nor by the enforcement agencies, by the police. I serve on the board of a not-for-profit where we lobbied with the government to get dowry included as a form of economic abuse in the family violence legislation in Victoria. Now it has also been included in the federal legislation on family law. So that was the advocacy piece we had to do to make sure that the judges as well as the police and the enforcement agencies understand that there can be underlying reasons for violence in the South Asian community, dowry being one of them. So now it's considered an economic abuse. There's been no separate provisions made for it, but it is still understood now by the law enforcement agencies. They understand now what it means, and they can then take appropriate measures. So those issues still remain, because we still have barely any Indian or South Asian people in the judiciary, especially in the higher judiciary. There's a few in the lower judiciary. You can literally count them on your fingers. So, and I used to be the national president of the Asian Australian Lawyers Association. We did a lot of advocacy on seeing more diversity in the legal profession. Hence, we see now some of our members have now been made barristers. They've been they've been appointed King's Counsel now, and also in the judiciary. So that is one of the biggest issues I see. So in the leadership space, you'll see very few South Asians. Even at large law firms, very few people of Asian, South Asian, migrant heritage are partners. So it still predominantly remains like that. Very few people get an opportunity. You'll see entry-level people coming in from migrant backgrounds, but as you get to the middle to higher level, the attrition rate is really high. People move away. They find it too difficult to progress. The biases that I spoke about earlier kick in. So those things are something that we still see in the legal profession. I think if there is violence involved, definitely the first thing is go to the police, because the police can actually intervene and prevent that situation. Stop that situation. But also you can take an intervention order in the court. You can go to the court and get an intervention order against your partner, so they cannot come near you. So that order prevents them from being in certain meters away from you, or can't come within the vicinity of where you live. They can't, obviously, if they breach the order, then there's going to be serious consequences of that. So that is an important step to take as well. Of course, for that you do need to go to a lawyer, but there is free legal centers in pretty much every suburb, or a few suburbs have one legal center, so you can go to that. And if you are facing financial hardship, or you have family violence issues and you don't have the money to be able to get a lawyer, hire a lawyer, you can actually go and get help from them as well. So these are some of the things and maybe you can seek help from the community. There are certain community social groups as well that support. There's refuges that the government runs and private not-for-profit institutions run as well. So you and your children can find refuge for some time over there till you figure out what the situation looks like. Also, if you're in permanent residency, if you don't have permanent residency and you're on a spouse visa and you still, or some other visa where you're facing family violence, you can go and you can ask for a permanent residency, which will and through which you will get more rights as well. So women of multicultural backgrounds face multiple kind of issues when they move to a new country, including isolation, depression, sometimes abuse from their partners, not having the social circles. So I think also sometimes also not having those kind of leadership qualities that you need in a different country. You may have them in your own country, but you need to adjust to a new environment to find those kind of skills. I think sport really helps you in finding those social circles, finding those skills, finding the peer support, overcoming issues of isolation and depression in a new country, creating a whole community for you that can help you overcome a lot of those issues. So I think that for me is the biggest reason why sport is so important for women of diverse background. I also feel that a lot of women don't focus on their health and wellness too much. They look after their whole family and they kind of take on a lot of responsibility, but they forget about their own health and well-being. So sport helps with that as well. It is really important to be conscious of your own, what you need to do. Not just your kids or your husband or your other family members. So those are, reasons why I feel that women of diverse background definitely need to participate in sport. And I've said before many times that women you don't need to come and play the sport if you don't want to. Come and volunteer, come and be part of the committee of that sport. You can be an umpire, you can be a coach, you can earn some money through that as well. You can take it up as a profession. You can come when your kids play and be part of that club where your kids play. So get involved in whatever way you want to in sport, but it is important. I think the biggest governance reform has been about having more women on boards. So that, as I said, there's 40% reservation for women on Victorian sports boards and 50% on that's a federal directive that there should be 50%. And by that, I think it's by 2027, every board at the national level must have either the chair or the vice chair as a woman. So I think for me that's one of the biggest reforms, because that creates a more equitable sporting environment. But also I've seen recently, the sports focus a lot now on diversity and inclusion, which is a great thing. Earlier, sports boards used to just focus on high performance, who's getting to the competitive level, who's going to compete at this level or that level, or which championship, and who's a star athlete. But the participation base was kind of not focused on so much. We always had to service them, but it was not a priority. But all sporting boards now have to have a plan for participation. So that, I think, is a really good governance reform, because it actually focuses on the core reason for sport. It's not always competing, because very few percentage of people who participate in a sport will eventually compete. So the participation base becomes stronger. So that's been a really good reform according to me. Also looking at sports boards as skills-based board, bringing in the skill set that is required to run it like a business. Having a lawyer, a person of finance background, having someone commercial acumen, someone who has broadcasting, understanding of broadcasting, marketing, social media. Those kind of things I think are important as well, especially when you go to sports boards. If you don't have that much staff, it is good to have people with those kind of backgrounds on the board, because they can bring some expertise to that. So that having that skills-based board, I think, has also been a really good governance reform. And then focusing on women's facilities and things, which is not necessarily part of the board's role, but a lot of them, because there's a woman on the board, they'll always be thinking constantly, okay, what do we need now in this club or this sporting facility? Do we need change rooms for women? Lighting, sometimes lighting is an issue, because women sometimes play late at night. It's not safe for them. And most women play late at night because the men hog the prime spots. They play earlier. The women have to play later because they're not given a priority. So the lighting, the safety, all of that is important. So with good governance reforms, with having women on boards, these kind of things also start becoming important. Also, there's been some work done recently in terms of women not having to wear white shorts or skirts, because of the menstruants, they menstruate and you can't wear white all the time. So those reforms, having protection for your, breast protection pads and things like that, those kind of things have come now in sport, which I think have made sport better for women. Having quota for boards is something really important. I've always rallied for it. I believe that unless and until you force that change upon organizations, it's not going to happen, because this power structures don't change overnight. People don't want to give up their positions of power. I hear a lot of men who say now they are victims of these quotas, that they don't get any jobs anymore because everything in all the priority is given to women. Well, for centuries, men have been given the priority, so I don't see anything wrong in women now being given the priority. And it's unless and until you do that, the structures will not change. So I think that quotas and even targets sometimes are important. Not everyone will agree to quotas, but targets, having a target that we need that many women on boards is extremely important. There's so few women. I think it's about 25% women on ASX listed boards, maybe only 3% or so of diverse background. So it's not changing in the corporate sector, and I don't know, feel that it will change. There has been work done, there's been research that's been done, but the implementation has been very slow. See, both of them I think go hand in hand. Without a culture of inclusion and safety, you can't have more people join the sport. If you don't have enough people joining the sport, of course, the high performance, you only have a limited pool to choose from to go in high performance. So I think that link is definitely there. But there's a direct link between safety and high performance. Particularly, we see that in gymnastics, and people may have seen that, the movie that was made, I think it was showing on Netflix as well. It's grooming has been a huge issue in gymnastics, where men have groomed young girls, even at the age of 12 or something. There have been sexual abuse claims from a very young age in that sport. And till we brought in very strict child safety rules, policies and laws, and a national integrity framework, which has now been implemented across the sporting sector, these things were going not unnoticed, but not remedied. Nothing was being done about it. And there's so many victims of that. So I think safety has and because of that, there's so much harm has been done. You can't, obviously, you'll stop participating in the sport if you're sexually abused. You will not be in high performance. So that there's a direct linkage between safety and high performance in that sense as well. But also I think participation and high performance in terms of the board sort of have to be constantly linked, because it's a whole strategy for an organization. It needs to be built into everything. So we kind of look at it as a holistic picture, making sure that we get constant, input into from the high performance managers and also from the participation managers, but also bring them together to see where there's an overlap and what we can do about it, bringing those resourcing together. I think boards are always about people. If you don't have the right kind of people on the board, then no matter which board it is, it's not going to function very well. If there's a huge difference in terms of the ideologies, the value sets, and a commitment to the goals and purposes of an organization, it's going to be a dysfunctional board. And that happens all the time. There's a lot of politics that goes on boards all the time in terms of trying to be especially for leadership positions, who's going to be the chair, who's going to be the vice chair, and that politicking goes on trying to influence people to do that, or influence people to make a certain decision on a board. That all happens all the time. And that doesn't necessarily happen in the best interest of the organization. It happens because people have vested interest in certain things. They try and they constantly try and bring on their friends onto the board, so that eventually they have a board clique that always thinks in the same way and doesn't work for the best in the betterment of the organization. Those are things that I always find on a lot of boards and are very disruptive. One of the things I feel is a solution would be to separate the chair role from an elected position to an appointed position as an external position, because then they come in as a chair who is going to look after, and they should still be aligned to the purposes of the organization and the vision and mission, but they will bring a different kind of skill set and will not be involved in that politics of every day, because it doesn't matter what politics you play, you're not going to become the chair is appointed separately. To me, I think that might be a good solution, but there needs to be some reform. Organizations need to be open to having that kind of a governance structure to be able to do that. Otherwise, I think it's just the power thing that always is problematic on boards. So Australia's sport is not made for people of diverse background. It always has been a sport has always been played by white people, and earlier white men, now women as well. So there's going to be, the structures are not going to be suitable for people of diverse background. There's going to be, the spaces are not welcoming of people of diverse background. So if you go to an AFL club, does it feel like a space where you belong? I don't think so. It still doesn't. Most places won't have even one person of diverse background. They're not neither in the who are neither in staff, nor coaches, nor on boards, nor playing. So they're not comfortable spaces for anyone to go in. Plus, if you look at the food that's served, it's sausage rolls or party pies, and that's not just, if I'm talking about all sport clubs. They're going to be, so when half of the population is anyway eliminated, Hindus don't eat beef, Muslims don't eat pork, they don't feel welcome, there's no food for them. There's never anything that is specifically done to make them inclusive. So because they weren't inclusive is the reason why I started my not-for-profits, I mean both of them, to try and create, see more inclusion in sport, be able to guide whether it's large sporting organizations or club level on what needs to be done to make sport more inclusive. At the top level, of course, they need to a lot of change in their policies and governance and things like that. At the grassroots level, it's as simple as letting women play with hijabs, more conservative clothing, serving food of different kinds, having women-only spaces, those kind of things. So that's the stuff I've been advocating for, and I see a lot of that happening now. I mean, when I started out 12, 13 years ago, intersectionality wasn't even a thing, but now we talk about intersectionality in everything. I worked on the intersectional framework for the Australian Sports Commission, which is being applied across all sports. So these are things that have changed for the better, but have been issues that the sporting structures here have faced for a very long time, of not being inclusive. You don't see our streets being reflected on our fields. So the kind of people you see on the streets you'll never see them on the fields or around them. So we need to change that. So as a board member, my first priority would be to make sure that our sport is reflective of our population. So even the staff, so when you're hiring staff, make sure that you at least interview a couple of people of diverse backgrounds, so it opens up the pool and you probably find the best candidate as well. So that is really important, having staff which is reflective, because when you see people helping you out with when you enter a club who look like you, you're more likely to kind of feel welcomed. And sometimes people speak the same language, you can revert to the language, people can feel more comfortable. So that is important. A bit of imagery is also really important. So when you put out, say, communication out or posters or signage for your sporting organization, it's really important that it has the faces of everyone around you, just not predominantly white spaces, but also people with disability, people of LGBTIQ plus background and all of that. It needs to be reflective of that. And I think at the top leadership level as well, you have to make an effort to make sure that your board also is diverse, because then new ideas will come forth. You will find more diversity in views and in values, not so much in values, sorry, in views and in opinions and in in terms of bringing forth new ideas. Diversity always leads to innovation. So I think those are important things. So one of the things I always say to boards is to, when you're recruiting, appointing, go for a wider pool of candidates. Always look for people of diverse background to also be included as part of at least be interviewed. Whether or not they're selected, you obviously want to select the best candidate, but make sure you're at least interviewing a few people of that background. So that's actually a Rooney Rule, which Rooney Rule was started in rugby in the US, where they decided to at least interview one person of BAME background, which is black ethnic minority background, because it opens up the pool and it does overturn the perception that there is no talent in that community. So that is very important for boards to do, to make sure that you open up the pool and then bring in more people. Use your leadership position wisely. Don't always bring in the same kind of people. but also as being as a board chair or being on a board, be open to ideas that are expressed on the board as well. Once you have diversity, but you're not ready to listen to that diverse view, then you're not going to actually ever be able to change. Think about diversity as a strength, as something that brings about innovation, and not try to shut them down because of some preconceived notion. That is really important as well. I'm slowly trying to learn that. I think I still sometimes struggle with it, taking on too much, but I'm now trying to consolidate, trying to give up some positions which I think I have been on for long enough, or I've contributed enough, or I think now is probably a good time for me to leave and find something different to do. So I'm doing all of that, but sometimes I also find the balance through running. I really enjoy my running. I think it takes away, when you're running, you're sort of away from everything. Your phone, you don't take your phone. I carry my phone for my music or for checking how fast I'm running, but I don't take calls and things. I just listen to music. The best ideas come to me when I'm running as well. So I'm kind of like just let go of everything, give that time. That's my me time. I don't have anyone around me. I'm just doing it myself. So I think having some kind of a reprieve from your day-to-day routine, something to do. I obviously encourage sport and fitness, but people may enjoy dancing or music or whatever else, some other hobby that they want to take up. That helps always. I'll say be resilient, because that is very important. That sport teaches you that as well. You have to be resilient, because if you because there'll be constant pushbacks when you are in this space where there's competition, where there's people wanting the same space, them wanting you out of that space. They'll push you back, but you have to have the resilience to stand back up and keep going on with believe in yourself. Don't give in to the imposter syndrome, because that really pulls you down, because you start believing that you can't do it, and then you're disheartened by it. And you can be a leader in any space you like. You don't have to be a leader right at the top. Start with whatever works for you. Maybe it's your local community. Maybe it's something that you really enjoy. It's something that you want to give back. Find a passion. Do something that you're passionate about, because you will not succeed in something that you're not. I always tell, if someone's on a leadership journey, if you pick up something that you think is in vogue, okay, I want to be a leader in this space because this is right now climate change is the big thing. But if you don't know anything about it, you don't necessarily feel anything deeply about it, you can't really succeed as a leader in that, because you just won't have that kind of, inner passion to drive you. So you always have to have that inner passion to drive you. And the last thing I would say is that you have to be proud of your heritage. Don't start pretending to be Australian, because we are not ever going to be Australian. We can imbibe the good values that Australia provides us. It's our a land where we live and give back to, but you are always going to be who you are, who you grew up as, and that is something that is worth holding on to, something that you should be extremely proud of. I am, and as I said, I still retain those values. I very proudly wear my sari. I talk about the values of Indian, the Indian values to other people. I talk about our heritage to everyone who's keen enough to listen. I'm always always pushing that agenda, but I'm very Aussie in certain ways. I would love a barbecue. I can have a Friday night drink. I can go out with people, have a good time at the tennis, the footy, whatever. Be part of the sporting culture. So it's about being both. It's being able to don't give up being who you are, because then you will not be respected by other people as well, because they will think that if she can't be true to her own culture and values, how can she be true to anything that you've acquired more recently. So yeah, that's my I think I constantly face, as I was saying as well, on the board positions that I have, even if I'm chairing, there's always people who are trying to push you out. They're always trying to discount everything you're saying, trying to call you a troublemaker, and trying to gaslight you, as they say sometimes. So that thing happens, and when I speak at public forums, I talk about my experiences of having been excluded, having been constantly now being ousted of my positions, trying to be ousted of my positions, or constantly being challenged on what I say, called a troublemaker. I think a lot of women of diverse background come and say that they feel the same way in whatever profession they are, wherever they are. They constantly get that as well. They're scared of raising their voice, because every time they do that, they call it a troublemaker, and they kind of, it's at the risk of their own, progression. I mean, I've reached a stage in life where I care, but I don't care enough. you know, if I lose it, I'll lose it. I'll go and get something else. But at least I'm making a change where other people like myself and the next generation is going to benefit out of that. So I think that challenge, these kind of you know, that unconscious bias, that people kind of making a joke about your culture which is not appropriate, or you know, just ignoring you. I'm sure everyone faces that sometime or the other. I won't say they're very funny, but I think most of the incidents you did feel excluded. I mean, at the top tier firms, they used to have Friday night drinks every time, whether it's in office or outside, and they always used to talk about these steak clubs and things, and I always felt excluded. But I was trying to, you know, fit in and, you know, make whatever conversation about whatever little I knew. So you did feel excluded. It wasn't fun, but it was what it was. One incident I'll talk about, which is, it's not to do with Friday night drinks, but it's a cultural thing. As a lawyer in India, you end up writing very kind of flowery language, very you know, colloquial. It's very you know, it's a bit archaic. It's like, you know, English people writing, you know, a century ago. It is like that. But that's how I studied. I did my law in India. I did my master's here. But so I grew up sort of in that environment, writing that kind of English. So when I was working at a top tier firm, I did some work, and this lawyer, this partner, you know, the senior partner comes to me and says, when I look at you read your English, it reminds me of an Englishman on a horse in breeches. So you could find it funny, it could be rude, it could be whatever, but it was just so, you know, something that the person could have expressed better, but it was kind of, you know, something that I faced, and I was like, I need to make a change in the way I write. I need to be more, you know, write in simple language. As they encourage you over here, write in simple language, more modern language. So that's what I obviously started doing very early on in my career, but it's something that was a reminder, okay, maybe that's the cultural sort of thing you see. We made little progress, but we've also moved a bit backwards, I feel, recently here in Australia, as in the other parts of the world as well. Trump isn't helping the cause for anyone. So diversity and inclusion was given priority. When I came in, it wasn't a big priority. Then it became a priority in the last 10 years or so. Then more recently, I've seen a step backward, because most organizations are giving up their diversity and inclusion leads. You know, those kind of departments are kind of not really functional. They have modified roles for people. There's no separate person doing that work. They've kind of put that into HR or whatever. So there is I feel like a less of a focus on it. So when there is less of a focus, obviously it's not going to be a priority, nor are things going to change. So I think that a lot more needs to be done right now, just to counter what is happening in the rest of the world. We need to work harder towards ensuring that we do see diversity in all our institutions. I don't think that is happening though. Yeah, I think the pathways towards in sport can seem a little less, because yes, not every sporting body is making money. But I think there are other roles for sport as well. There is sports broadcasting as money. Sports lawyers also, there's a few now coming up the ranks. There is, you know, someone who wants to do, work in the sports tech area. That's a very upcoming area as well. Then there's sports management, sports science. There is, I guess, there used to be rules for diversity and inclusion managers and things. That is right now a bit of a casualty, but still in the future, hopefully that'll be revived. There's various, you can teach in that area, you can go to a university. There's a lot of university roles as well. Research, a lot of research is being done in sport. So you don't have to necessarily play the sport, but there are a lot of opportunities in sport otherwise. But I do warn people that sports sector, if you're working directly in the sporting sector, your hours can be quite, you know, can be anything. You can be working late hours because the sporting event is going on. You can be working on the weekends. The pay may not be very high. But if it's a passion thing for you, you should definitely still do it, because you know, it gives you happiness. So the government does provide grants for certain things. So they do provide grants for capacity building. They provide grants for diversity and inclusion. They do provide grants for you know, creating access and various other things, governance also, so you can train your board people, board members to in good governance. Maybe they'll provide you some funding to do social media or whatever. So the government does provide, they also provide resources, both the Australian Sports Commission, which is of course a government body, and then government also, the Sports and Recreation Victoria. They provide a lot of resourcing, as in like resources, online resources to help you structure the sport and they do seminars, and they Vic Sport, I'm on the board of Vic Sport as well, which is the umbrella body for sport in Victoria. They also do a lot of seminars and capacity building exercises. They recognize people. They've got awards and stuff. So there's a number of organizations that are kind of doing it. There's not-for-profits that are working in that space as well. So there is some support provided. There is more, of course, the government can provide more funding to sport. Definitely, we're always asking for more funding in sport. But we're seeing some of the funding in sport is being directed to the departments of health and education and stuff as well. So that comes indirectly into sport as well. But increase I would say budget allocation to sport should be higher, would be really useful. And, not just focus on high performance sport. Still a majority of the funding goes to high performance sport, which is winning for people who win medals and who are at the elite level, but it doesn't go as much to participation. Even federations don't push that much sometimes into participation as they put into high performance. So that needs to change, that shift of, having at least equal, if not more, in participation as compared to high performance. Yeah, India has still got a long way to go. They have had recent reforms. They've got a new national sports policy. They've also got a new governance act, a sports governance act. So, and they're also strengthening their integrity. So there is a number of reforms that are being planned, but they've just about been legislated. So we've got to yet see how it all pans out, what really the devil lies in the detail. I have recently spoken at a number of conferences in India, both at FICCI and CII, and I have been doing a lot of work in India as well, and trying to see how we can build their capacity with what Australia has to offer. So I think there is various things that can be done in India, but I think the governance reforms will be crucial, because I feel that there's a lot of government political interference in sport as well, which should be taken away. And I think people who've been sitting there on board for like 30-40 years should be ousted. They should run proper elections. They should have the right skills based on their boards, that kind of thing. Providing pathways is important. Having enough competitions. They don't have enough competitions. The culture of sport also needs to change, because people don't really play sport in India still. Majority of the people will still think sport as a something that we do if we have time, if we have if we want to do time pass or whatever as they call it. So it's not something that's considered as a serious option. So till that happens, I think it'll take a while to get there. But I think with the Commonwealth Games, hopefully things will change. It's going to happen in 4 years. And then if the bid for Olympics is successful, they'll definitely have to do certain things. Otherwise, they will not be successful in the bid. I think one advice I would give to women who are going on the leadership journey is to find possibly a mentor. Because that really helps. Someone who's gone through the journey themselves, and can guide you on certain aspects of what you need to improve about yourself, what you need to work on, what you already have strengths in, so that you can focus on those and then work on the things that you don't necessarily have. You can go through a formal program for that, or you can find in anyone you think is a role model. You reach out. You don't be shy. Reach out to someone and see if they can give you some time. You can also find a sponsor. That's different from a mentor. Sponsors takes active steps to find you possibly a job or a position, but it's difficult to find sponsors. But I would certainly recommend finding a mentor.